The Teddy Bear Clinic has accused the government of deliberately ignoring young people's voices in the country's efforts to fight gender-based violence and femicide in the country. This after children were removed from the recently concluded Summit's program. The decision received widespread criticism, including from the Teddy Bear Clinic. For more on this, I'm joined by the clinic's Dr. Shaheda Omar. Dr. Omar, very good afternoon. I'd like to start off with a look at what does the Teddy Bear Clinic actually do?
The Teddy Bear Clinic works with victims of child abuse. We provide medico-legal support or medical examinations of victims of child abuse, neglect, victims of child trafficking, and we provide psychosocial support, mental age assessment, psychological assessments, and we also work within the school communities where we go out and work with learners at schools, with educators. We do a lot of gender-based violence dialogues, crime prevention dialogues. So a very holistic approach, an integrated approach to working with victims of child abuse.
Now, President Cyril Ramaphosa has described the issues around GBVF, if you will, as a pandemic. Now, a big constituent of that are children. Now, when children are not permitted to speak and say what's on their minds at a platform such as this, does this send mixed signals, if you will? Does it confuse you, for instance, as a custodian of children and their issues?
So I just want to correct the statement made that on day one, yes, the children were excluded, but in response to the children crying out to be heard, and they wanted to be heard by the president himself. So the children were then put onto the program the second day, on day 2, where they were given a platform to share their concerns, their worries, and to make recommendations and present resolutions. However, if we just look at the history of this process, previously in the first summit, children were not included. They were out of the picture with regard to the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence. Children were not consulted, were not engaged at all. And even with regard to this Children's Summit, we had a pre-summit before the National Summit on GBV, which was also a last-minute thing where we had to gather children across the different provinces to get representation and to bring them into a summit to enable them and give them an opportunity to engage with each other, but also to address the different pillars, the 6 pillars of accountability, prevention, justice, response, support and care, economic empowerment, and research and information. And what came out of this summit when the children made the resolution was very, very, I think, poignant, because they spoke about a 7th pillar. The 6 pillars address violence against women and children, but the 7th pillar that they have put forward is specifically focusing on children. So I think we realize that government has there have been omissions, glaring omissions, but they have realized that they cannot exclude children's voices. If we want to see a disruption, a break in the cycle of intergenerational patterns of violence, children's voices have to be part of this journey, and they have to be part of this process, because they are the ones that are going to inform us on how they feel safe, what will make them feel safe and secure, and what should be done and instituted, and measures to be implemented to ensure their safety and protection.
Now, Dr. Omar, the President said that citizens must hold the government accountable. How would young people hold the government accountable?
Well, that's very important what you're saying, because children should be allowed that platform where they would hold stakeholders, law enforcement officers, healthcare practitioners, education authorities, home affairs, because young people would certainly have representation, and they have civil society platforms where they, people in the children's sector who are advocates, who are activists on children's rights. Those are one of the platforms to channel their grievances and to ensure that support is enlisted, and that the people responsible for failing children, the injustices that are perpetrated against children by the very systems that are supposed to protect them, that they have these channels to address that. So, of course, and I think another request that was a recommendation that was made by the children, that the council, the gender-based a gender-based violence council that is to be established, and the president promised that either by the end of this year or early next year. So the children's recommendation has been that a child representative has to be on that platform as well, so that people can, they would have channels to, of course, escalate and ensure that things are followed through and that they are not ignored and they are not subjected to secondary victimization and trauma.
Now, when they come up with this child that sits on this board, is this child a survivor of abuse?
So at this point in time, we haven't actually engaged on that. We haven't actually discussed this with the children. They would have to come up with a resolution, because remember, it's the children's summit, it's children's dialogue, it's the children's platform. So the children that attended the gender-based violence summit were 3 representatives from the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund Parliament, and they were 2 16-year-olds, a male who is 16, a female of 16, and another female of 17 years. But it also included disability. So the young male has a hearing deficit, and of course signing was provided, and in terms of support for the person to communicate with everybody and to be understood. So it would have to be their decision on how they want to drive this forward. I don't think all we are there in the children's sector is to assist, support, and provide resources where possible and enable them to take their plight forward.
Now, Dr. Omar, now that we have you here on the platform, let's talk a little about signs of child abuse. Can you give us some tips on what can guardians, what can parents look out for in that sort of area?
So there are many things that parents can look out for. And I always say, let's not isolate one symptom, but look at a cluster of symptoms, because, there are other reasons that children may behave in the way they do. So we need to look at behavioral indicators, physical indicators, psychological indicators. So the behavioral indicators could be where a quiet child has suddenly become unruly, disruptive, a bully, aggressive, outbursts. And those would be some of the behaviors. The emotional indicators or psychological would be eating patterns, sleeping patterns, all changing, where a child may either eat a lot, sleep a lot, not sleep, recurrent nightmares. Then physical indicators, we would see regression to a former state of security, where the child felt more comfortable and safe at that point. So you would find nail biting, pulling their hair out, but also loss of bowel control, bladder control for somebody who's already been potty trained and is older. But again, in terms of other indicators, one would see that a loss of interest in activities that they previously enjoyed, poor performance at school, if they're attending school, but also withdrawn behavior, isolation, not willing to engage with others. So there are many indicators, but I do urge people to err on the side of caution, that if there's any suspicion, doubt, or inkling, one should rather be neurotic about it and follow up. The rule of index is to follow up to ensure that this child has not been subjected to any kind of abuse.
Now, what are the messages that parents and guardians should be given their children around child abuse? Obviously, let's talk about prevention. I mean, prevention is definitely better than cure.
So prevention is key. Prevention is key. The one thing that we always urge and implore is that parents please engage in dialoguing with your children on a regular basis. There needs to be consistency, using bedtime routines, eating, family time, bath time routines, but talking to children, engaging with them when they return from school, or, when they are spending some time, showing an interest in their activities, in their day, in their peer interaction or sports activities, to actually see and read the body language as well. But to speak to children about acceptable and unacceptable behaviors. So actually demonstrating what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, but also speaking to safe and unsafe touches, and not about good and bad touches, because we know that the good touches the bad touches could actually feel good because our bodies are programmed in a certain way. So it's about opening the lines of communication, giving children a platform, permission to ask questions, because often we know sex and sexuality is a taboo subject, and we find that many families don't even know how to begin or where to begin. And there are organizations out there that parents could actually reach out to, or there are lots of books on the internet on communicating around that. But even school programs, the comprehensive sexuality education program is key, where we're finding that parents are still resistant to that. And I think we need to be more open, because it's not about teaching children to engage in sexual behavior, but it's looking at that the more information and knowledge they have, the more empowered they are to make informed, positive choices, not to engage in risky behavior. There's a lot of opportunity now to engage on the internet, for children to be exposed to pornography, for children to be exposed to child trafficking, for parents to also have those discussions, dialogue around that, know who their child is communicating with, but also to speak to children about people on the internet, not engaging or communicating with people they actually don't know, because the person that actually is always often impersonating, we're looking at your career offender or your pedophile who's going to lurk on these sites to have access to children. And if we just look at research, that more than 80% of children between the ages of 10 and 14 have been exposed to porn. And that's accidentally. It's not because they deliberately or purposefully looked out for porn. But we also urge parents, please talk to your children, because their source of reference needs to come from a credible, safe and trusting environment, because often children turn to these sites or they turn to their peers, and the information that they receive is not always safe, it's not always accurate, and of course children are then finding themselves in risky situations, in compromising situations where they are victimized.
Now, Dr. Omar, government has set aside 21 billion rand. Now, that's a substantial amount to fight GBV and femicide. Have you, as a representative of young people or children, put in a stake for part of that amount to be directed toward the issues affecting children?
Well, we certainly, would take this opportunity to hold government accountable, that we are looking at more than 22 million children in the country who are our future leaders of the nation. And if we want to see a change, we've got to invest in the children, because they are our future. They are our present and they are our future. So we have to invest in the children. But again, as I say, this is a dialogue that will continue. This is just the beginning. The second summit, there's a lot of work to be done. We in the children's sector, we discussed this with UNICEF, with the Department of Social Development and other people in the children's sector, that this is just the beginning. We cannot give up. We've come a long way, and there's a long way to go before we actually say we have arrived.
Dr. Omar, thank you kindly for your time this afternoon. Dr. Shaheda Omar from the Teddy Bear Clinic.